Hey everyone, today I'm talking about the INFJ savior complex. I will say right off the bat, this does apply to INFJ personality types and INFP personality types. However, I see it a lot more with INFJs. I really do. I feel like with INFPs, they can merge with partners and really get into a savior thing with partners, but they also tend to be a little bit better able to hold on to their own emotions and express their own emotions when they're in a relationship with somebody else. So that might have something to do with it. Whereas with INFJs, I really see a tendency to lose ourselves totally in a relationship. And a lot of times this comes back to this savior complex thing that's going on. So, okay, what is the savior complex? If you Google the savior complex, it's trying to save someone else, right? Basically, that's the most simple way to look at it. You're trying to rescue someone else, usually from their own self-inflicted problems or their own situations in life, but you're trying to rescue or save someone else. This tends to happen to a lot of INFJs and some INFPs in relationships because we are natural healers. This comes from our healing ability. Because we're natural healers, we're really attracted to the wounds in other people. And in fact, this is something that a lot of INFJs and INFPs need to be careful about. Because a lot of the time, what's drawing us into a person is their wound energy. We feel very magnetized to them, very interested in them, fascinated by them. We might even feel obsessed. We can't stop thinking about them. We're really trying to puzzle out their motivations. We're trying to learn about their past circumstances. We're kind of trying to put together this whole picture of the person and their life and their history. And a lot of the time we can mistake this for romantic attraction or sexual attraction because it feels so intense. And in our society, where intuitive people are in the minority, we don't really have a framework or a language to talk about this kind of intense attraction if it's not romantic or it's not sexual. For most people, most mainstream types, when they feel this kind of intensity with a person, it's always sexual. It's always romantic. They know nothing else. So that's what's really put forth to everybody, that if you feel intensely magnetized toward a person, or you're thinking about them all the time, or you're obsessed with them, it must be sexual, it must be romantic, right? There's some sort of like in love thing happening there. Now, while this does happen for INFJs and INFPs, it also happens that sometimes it's not sexual, it's not romantic, it is a wound attraction. That's what's going on. We are healers, that's a core part of ourselves. And as healers, we become very aware of the people in our environment who have wounds, especially if they're untreated wounds. So you might meet someone who has been wounded in the past, but they've done a lot of work, they've processed a lot of it. So even though the scars are still there, that wounding is still there, and we feel a mild pull towards the person, it's not the kind of pull we're going to feel with someone who has an untreated wound, a wound that has not been processed, it's not being addressed. Maybe the person is acting out, they're being very self-destructive, they're actively suppressing any processing of that wound. Those are going to be the people we feel a really strong pull towards, because it's like they are a person on the battlefield with an actively bleeding wound, right? It's like they just got shot, even if it happened years ago, or they just got their leg cut off. They're laying there, we're hearing their cries of pain, we're seeing them in distress energetically, we're picking up on that, even if the person themselves is unaware that they're in so much pain. They're suppressing it, maybe they're coping with it through addiction or workaholism or something else. They're unaware that they have this actively bleeding wound. But on a subconscious level, the INFJ or the INFP is not. So that's the first piece of this. We're very much attracted to wounds and wounded people. The second part of this is that when we look at someone, when we get to know someone in an intimate relationship, and it doesn't always have to be, again, a romantic or a sexual thing. It can be a coworker, it can be an acquaintance. But when we start to get to know someone, we can see the person's essence. We see the personality on top, right? Like the social personality they're using to function in the world. And that social personality might be someone who is very competent or is very organized or seems very normal, right? But we can see beyond that. We see beyond that to the essence. So we see that inside the person, there is a very insecure small child still crying out for attention and love. Or we can see, the essence is someone who is actually very thoughtful, even though maybe the social personality comes off as arrogant and full of bravado. We see the essence is actually more thoughtful and shy. So we see all the layers of a person. We see their social personality and we see their essence. We also see their potential, and especially with INFJs. And I think this might be why the savior complex, another reason, comes on a little bit more strongly with INFJ personality types, because we can really see the potential of people. We can see what they could become if they did shift, if they did choose healing, if they did process their past experiences, their past wounding, if they did work through those things, we can really see what they might become. So we might meet someone, for example, who their social personality is they're very stoic, right? They're very stoic, they're very competent at their job, they're very independent, they come off as not needing anybody. And we see that social personality in play. And then we see beyond that to the essence. We see that inside they're actually very insecure. They have very low self-esteem. They did not feel like they got what they needed from their parents when they were growing up. So they're still very wounded about that, and they're closed off. And the reason they're so stoic and they're so independent is because they're afraid to get too close to anyone, right? So we see that. And then we also see the potential that if they worked through that wounding, they could actually really open up and blossom. They could become comfortable with emotional intimacy with other people. They could let down their guard. They could let some lightheartedness and play into their lives. And we can see the kind of person they would become if all of that happened. They would be more playful. They would be more relaxed. They would be more open. They could meet me here with emotional intimacy, and they could share freely, right? So we're seeing all of that at the same time. And for INFJs, we tend to focus on what could be, right? Well, if we just worked through these wounds, if they just processed that past pain and they got through the sort of existential distress that they're working with, wow, they could turn into a whole new person. And that would be really great. I could see this potential. They could just be this really giving, playful, open person. That would be so wonderful. So we tend to focus on that. And then we go into, they just need a little help. This is where things get dangerous for INFJs. They just need a little help. They just need someone to listen to them, support them, help them find resources. And because INFJ personality types are so growth-oriented and we're so focused on our own growth, we've usually done a lot of work already. We've gone to therapy, we've read a lot of books, we've gone to sharing circles, we've done art therapy, we've done journaling, we've done a lot of self-care and self-healing work on ourselves. We love sharing those resources, we love sharing that information. So that's the place we go to with this other person. Again, maybe it's like a new partner, and they're actually someone we do feel a romantic sexual energy with, or maybe it's just a coworker. It can be an acquaintance in our social group, but we see, oh, this person's struggling on the inside, no one else sees it, I see it, I also see what they could become if they work through the struggle. They just need a little help. I can be that help, right? This is where things get real sticky. I can be that help. It feels so easy for us. We are naturally healers. We want to do it anyway. They just need a little help. And that's when we start to insert ourselves into the situation. Now, if we can stay detached here, if we can, offer them help. Hey, I read this great book. You might want to check it out. Or, oh, have you ever thought about doing this? And then we objectively stand back. We see how they handle our help, right? Like our attempts to help. And we don't take it personally if they brush us off or they're not ready, right? If they're just like, oh yeah, that sounds good, but they never read the book. Okay, I tried. And then we move on to other things in our life. What can happen when the savior complex comes into play is when we're trying to help the person, our own childhood wounds are activated. right? So like with that person who's very stoic on the outside, but very insecure on the inside, and we just see if they felt safe, they could really blossom, and we try to start helping. But then the more we are trying to reach out to them and connect, they're rebuffing us. And ooh, that feels just like it did in my childhood when my mom or dad was incapable of emotional intimacy. That's when the INFJ or the INFP can really get triggered, and it activates this savior complex. Because a lot of us had narcissistic parents, emotionally immature parents, parents who were unable to meet our needs for emotional intimacy or accept our help, accept our attempts at any kind of connection. It reminds us of that, and it can activate our own wounding. So now we have a person who's in their wounding, their unresolved stuff, they haven't processed it, they might not even want to. And the INFJ or the INFP who only wanted to help, well, now our wounding is activated too. So now we've got two people with wounds, and maybe those wounds are playing off of each other. This is when we get into rescuer situations. This is when we get into, why am I doing this again? I sold myself out. I gave up so much of myself. I betrayed myself, and I engaged in self-abandonment to help this other person who wasn't going to be helped, didn't want help, and was kind of a lost cause. This is when we get into toxic friendships, toxic partnerships, toxic coworker relationships, right? Where we're being very codependent with the person. We're getting wrapped up in their outcome, wrapped up in their problems. We're obsessing. Their outcome feels like it's affecting our lives in a very deep way. It comes back to our own childhood wounding. This is because in childhood, when we had that parent who could not meet us where we were, who could not give us emotional intimacy, they could not connect with us, they could not feed our emotional needs, we adopted this belief that to be loved, I must be useful. To be loved, I must be helpful, right? The parent must have some use for me. And usually because the parent was narcissistic or emotionally immature, they used us as a counselor or a confidant or someone to soothe them, someone to meet their emotional needs, which is a reversal of the parent-child relationship. So we're bringing that belief to this new relationship. Well, if I just try harder, right? Like my initial attempts to help, that's not working. The person's rejecting me even more, or I'm becoming enmeshed with the person. Now this whole rescuer thing is going on. I don't like it. I just need to try harder. This is a really big stumbling block for INFJ personality types in particular. I just need to try harder. And maybe if I dismiss my own needs from this relationship, maybe if I just have no needs, right, or I put my needs to the side and I totally focus on this person's healing, I totally focus on helping them process their wounds, they will process them, and then they'll be whole and healthy and healed, and then they can come back and focus on my needs, right? So it's kind of like this fantasy we had in childhood, like if I can just help my parent, if I can just make my parent better, fix them, then they can show up for me. They can show up for me like a mom or a dad does, and they can meet my emotional needs. This usually is not going to happen. Almost all of the time, this is not going to happen, right? We're repeating this pattern as adults that we had with our parents as children. And the truth is, you cannot process someone else's growth and healing. You cannot fix them. You cannot make it better for them. You can offer support. Yes, you can offer help. You can offer. But if the person doesn't want to be helped, or they're really entrenched in their pattern, or they're just not done with their pattern yet, a lot of the time, this is another really big challenge for INFJ personality types, because we're always seeing how things can improve, and we're always seeing how something can be made better or more efficient. So to us, we're like, well, why wouldn't you want to let go of the wounding? Why wouldn't you want to process this? You could be such a healthier person, such a happier person. But a lot of times the person, they're just not done with the pattern yet. They're still working through it, and they're just going to take the time they need to work through it. That might mean that they're in that pattern for another 5 years or another 10 years. They might be in that pattern for this lifetime. That's their choice, and that's free will, and they get to do that. And that's something that's very valuable for INFJs to remember, and to try to take a step back and see, okay, that person's not done with that pattern yet. I can't force them out of it. I can't love them out of it. It's not if I try harder, or if I have less needs, or if I contort myself to fit into this shape that I think they want and that will promote their healing, that things will get better. No, we need to take a step back and say, for whatever reason, they're not ready to give up this pattern yet. And I can't process it for them. I cannot take on that wound for them. I cannot take on their growth for them. That's something they have to do. And in the meantime, before they process that wound, before they do their healing work, they're going to have severe limitations as a person. They're going to have severe limitations around emotional connection, emotional intimacy. They are not going to be able to meet my needs in those ways. So I need to move on, and I need to connect with someone else who can. So please keep all of that in mind. When we move into this new space of, okay, they're not ready to give up the pattern, their pattern's not my responsibility, I can see that I can't get my needs met here, I'm going to move on to someone else that I can have emotional connection with. It can be really freeing. It can be very relieving. There usually is a little bit of grief and a little bit of heartbreak involved. It depends on the closeness that you had with the person. Obviously, if it's a partner and you're breaking up, there's going to be a lot more grief than if it's a coworker. But once you move through that, you can move back into a place of freedom once you disengage from your expectations of the other person and you let them go their own way with their own growth and healing. Again, you can still love them, you can still support them, but you have to let them go their own way. If this video was helpful to you, please like and subscribe to my channel. It really helps me out, helps grow the channel and spread awareness for other INFJ and INFP people who are out there struggling with the exact same things that you are. Please also subscribe to my newsletter. I teach classes for INFJ personality types and INFP personality types, usually a new one every month, honestly. There's a lot of classes that come and go. So if you're interested in creativity, intuition, relationships for INFJs and INFPs, writing, right now I'm doing a class on the midlife transition. I do all sorts of topics. If you're interested in personal growth, personal development for intuitive personality types, please subscribe to my newsletter because that's where you'll get all the updates, all the notifications. People always ask me, where can I find this information on your website? And I always say, it happens so quickly, I literally cannot update the website. So please get on my newsletter list because that's the best way to stay up to date on the new offerings and what's being offered right now. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in today. I will see you next time.